Hello, my name is Dante Renee, and welcome to the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more. Like tonight's film, 1970's Count Dracula by JESS FRANCO, or as it says in the opening credits, Jesse Franco. He does use different variations of his name. If you are a JESS FRANCO fan, you will see that. You will see that sometimes different variations of JESS Franco, or a bit of his birth name of Jesus Franco, and it's sometimes a completely different name altogether of a jazz musician he likes, so on and so forth. This is from 1970, and yes, this does star Christopher Lee, who you're seeing there, and also you're seeing Soledad Miranda, who actually has a smaller role in the film, but not a small role in the storyline of the film. And this is also a JESS Franco movie that is filled to the brim with JESS Franco male actor regulars. If you want to see kind of a JESS Franco film that has a compilation of his biggest male actors, 1970s Count Dracula will definitely give you that, as well as and including Klaus Kinski, and we have Paul Mueller and Jack Taylor, who some people know from Female Vampire, which I also looked at on this YouTube page. But yes, we do have Klaus Kinski in here. This was the JESS Franco period where it was produced by Harry Alan Tower. So this is a film that I found even some non-JESS Franco fans know about this film and possibly like this film. Also, I had the TV on last Halloween season in 2016 and noticed that this movie was on television, was on kind of a local station. I don't know if it was edited or but there's not much editing that's needed. We'll get into that, but so this definitely has some popularity towards it, especially with Christopher Lee in there. We also have Maria Raum in here. There's a lot of Franco people in this movie. Count Dracula by JESS Franco is said to be very, very similar to the original written work by Bram Stoker. If you know anything about JESS Franco, you know that throughout his cinematic career, he definitely has a focus on this story. As I watched this movie, I saw kind of his own version of this story that he details in this movie with a movie like Vampiros Lesbos, which I already reviewed in this YouTube page, where you can almost see Vampiros Lesbos being a Franco version or a version of the Bram Stoker story that he is detailing in this particular film. Really, as some say, some of the most closeness to the book cinematically out of any Dracula movie. I've heard that from some people. This is the back of the Blu-ray from Severin Films right here. I picked this up last year. I believe it was about $18, and you can see some of the big names right there, including, of course, Soledad Miranda. This is a 98-minute movie, and in terms of the plot and the storyline, this is following the Count Dracula story from the Bram Stoker novel. So let's get into this movie here, folks. There is so much awesomeness to happen here. Let's get into 1970s Count Dracula by JESS Franco. First and foremost, we're going to look at the music here. The music in this film was done by Bruno Nicolai. By the way, the editing in this film was done by Bruno Mattei. Wow, look him up. You'll see some background on him. But the music was done by Bruno Nicolai. I actually have the very rare CD soundtrack of this score. I don't believe it's been re-released since on vinyl, or even in this edition of the Blu-ray. There's not like a CD as well. So it's pretty rare, and I believe the soundtrack goes by the non-American title, so it's even harder to find for most people who are trying to look the score up for this movie. But Bruno Nicolai has done a variety of scores for JESS Franco, and this is the mystery, the gothic magic, the period piece. It is the representation of darkness, of vampiric possession, and large stone castles and large rooms and solitary, claustrophobic, lonely, confined, vulnerable bedrooms. The music is orchestrated. It has a classic feel to it. You're not going to be getting the regular Franco, for example, comparing it to Vampiros Lesbos, or you're not going to be getting that jazzy, funky, saucy, sleazy feel with this film. Definitely classical, orchestrated, but haunting and creepy and dramatic and gothic. It's an unbelievable score, and there are a couple main themes, including the main theme and cues that repeat throughout the film in various versions wow, they haunt you and they give you magical feelings inside of your stomach. That's all I can say. A bit of great darkness as well. We also have the sound of thunder in this movie. Thunderstorms. We have the sounds of distant voices down a hallway screaming in agony. We have the sounds, the whispered sounds of a person's name being called, and mind control, and them being lured to them, whispered in the night, reminding me so much of a Franco regular also in his films, utilizing the mind control of the Dracula story in many of his own films. The interesting thing is, most of the you always hear Linda. In this film, it's Lucy, the character Lucy from the story Count Dracula. The interesting thing that I found here, though, is that the prominent character in here, who is the man who's going to Dracula's castle in the beginning of the film, and almost becomes a vampire. The interesting thing that I noticed when I watched this film is that the focus is on him in the same way that the focus is typically on a female character in a JESS Franco film. I thought that was very interesting, kind of in these alternate reality nightmares and dream states, and feeling vulnerable and lost in this castle as he's visiting Count Dracula. And so I found those comparisons there very interesting, in the focus on the male character in this film for Franco. Although we do have a prominent, but short-lived, also with Soledad's character as well. Unbelievable atmosphere in this film, with the fog, a horse-drawn carriage, a foggy, kind of dusky, early morning scene, fog billowing and pouring, shots from the ground up that you would typically see in a Franco film, wild zooms, even with the elegance and the classical nature and the period piece of this film, Count Dracula. Very interesting. He had wild zooms here in this film. He was doing something in this film also where he was doing close-up shots of people, of their faces, but then would zoom back, or back up, and you would see the grandiose scope of the room that close-up person's face is residing in. And there are these shots that just show this unbelievable seismic quality to a space that a character is in. Unbelievable locations in this movie. The castle, this unbelievable stone castle. I mean, where does he get these locations to film in? And barren trees outside. As I mentioned, some of the locations in the beginning of this video, with the being represented by the score music by Bruno Nicolai. We have these unbelievable shots of Soledad and Klaus Kinski and Christopher Lee and more, where Franco is filming them very, very close up on their eyes, which is something that Franco definitely does in his other films. But in this particular case, he's really allowing the actor, the character, to look directly into the camera. And I found that extremely unnerving and interesting. I'm not talking about some mistake where somebody looks at the camera. I'm talking about them intentionally zooming in on the camera, in the direction of the camera, not breaking the fourth wall. I'm talking about their gaze is upon the camera. And I found that to be very haunting and interesting and unique. We also have the use of silence in this movie. Now, there's tons of score from Bruno Nicolai in this movie, almost wall to wall. But then we also have the use of silence in this film as well, that is also, haunting in its own particular way. Interestingly enough, we have some bloody scenes in here for Franco. We also have, some violence. If you're not seeing gore, but you're getting violent scenes in here. But no nudity and no direct explicit sexuality that is typically found in Jess Franco's other films. Very interesting, but it seems that with Harry Alan Towers, and also really kind of in a way being true to the source material for Franco, the classic period piece here for this story from Bram Stoker. It's very interesting, that lack of sexuality, but you do see sexuality predominantly in some scenes with Christopher Lee and Soledad Miranda, although it's not direct and it's not explicit, and there's no nudity. Now, but there is a power, and there is a power to this film, and there is such great atmosphere in this film. The locations are part of the story. The people's faces are part of the story. There is some disturbing things involving children in this movie and involving a baby. Unbelievable shots of Soledad Miranda as a vampire in the woods. It reminded me of the cover of the first Black Sabbath album. Just, my gosh, unbelievable shots of her in her paleness, in her evil nature, and amidst the barren tree landscape. Unbelievable. I mean, this is truly a Jess Franco gothic, elegant, classical, Halloween, haunted, castle kind of a film, where it is just the horse-drawn carriages and the mental possession and the sexuality, with, even though there's not direct sexuality, there's a sexuality running throughout this film, most definitely. And the coffins and the story, and you're going to be familiar with the story, but when you watch this film, you're also getting it through Jess Franco's cinematography and style. And there is great deals of that. Unbelievable usage of darkness in the film, in terms of a lack of light and shadows. Unbelievable shadows, and also sparse lighting. The shadows. Sometimes you think, man, is this supposed to be that dark? Yes, it was.